Welcome to Joyful Sober. This is a series of conversations with creatives, entrepreneurs, and inspiring people doing extraordinary things beyond getting wasted. I'm Alison Lassick, and I'm chatting today to Pete Brennan of Heaps Normal, alcohol-free beer. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I'd like to pay my deepest respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be listening into our conversation today. So welcome, Pete. Pete's the founder and creative director of branding and design studio Electric and Analogue, and one of the founders of Heaps Normal booze-free beer. Together with three of his best mates, Pete and Heaps Normal are doing important work to reduce the role of alcohol in our culture and inspire people to bring more intentional, creative, and joyful moments into their lives. So yeah, I'm really excited to chat to you today, Pete. How are you going there?
Really well, Alison. Thanks for having me on. Super pumped to chat.
Excellent. Oh, cool. Yeah, it's great to have you here too. I'm really keen to hear all about Heaps Normal and also your own journey as well. So, yeah, can you tell us how Heaps Normal came about? First off, to kick things off.
Yeah, for sure. Oh God, there's a few layers to it, really. But I guess um, it started. I mean, going way back, and a bit of a sob story. But my dad was a pretty abusive alcoholic growing up, so I kind of grew up in the shadow of that as a kid, and subsequently, I've never really had a good relationship with alcohol myself. Fast forward a few years, and running a branding studio, we kind of had the idea of doing a non-alc beer, more from I guess from two angles really. One from the family kind of history and trying to address something in that space, but also from a branding studio perspective, trying to create a brand without client input the way we wanted to do it, to see what would work, and if we could build something in that space. So it wasn't initially called Heaps Normal. It was called all sorts of things, from quiet beer to a number of different names that we had going through kind of the through the mill. And it got to a point where I thought this could really become something. Hit up a few people in the kind of in my network that were in the kind of the brewing space. Got kind of politely declined by a few people who just thought it wasn't really a thing, non-alc beer, and there wasn't really a space for it, and it wasn't really for them, and which is totally cool. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And then essentially reached out to a good friend of mine, Andy Miller, who we'd done some work. He was working in a craft beer company in Sydney, and we'd done some work with him, and just hit him up and said, hey, can we go and have a beer? Like, I want to run something past you. So we went and met in a pub in Piermont, and we kind of sat down, and I just pitched this idea to him, and straight away he just went, I'm 100% in. Like, I love the concept. And he's spent a lot of time overseas. Like, he spent some time living in China, and is just fascinated with culture and culture change and how we behave and human behavior and stuff. So for him, it was a real challenge that he wanted to embrace and get involved with. Obviously for me, it was both the personal connotation through my family experience as a kid growing up, and also through the lens of building a brand. And then, we obviously needed somebody who knew how to make beer as well, because we were essentially like a brand and a marketing guy. We're putting this idea together. So we reached out to Benny Holdstock, who is another co-founder, he's been a brewer for some pretty well-known beer brands across Australia, like Young Henry's and Grifter, and he's worked at Four Pines, and he's worked with some really amazing brands. So we kind of pulled him into the conversation and said, right, we need someone to actually make the liquid. And he obviously saw that as a massive challenge as well, because there's obviously there's been non-alc beer. It's been out there for a long time. And I think probably fair to say it's never really been done amazingly well. So we thought there was a gap there, and we saw it as a challenge. So So the three of us jumped in, and then we pulled in another good friend of mine named Geordie Smith, who's a pro surfer that I grew up with in South Africa. Who I knew he was off the alcohol because he'd come runner up to being a world title, a world champion title holder twice in a row, over a few years, and he was looking for a bit of a competitive edge. So he was in too. So the four of us incorporated and started the business, and a year or so later, here we are.
Yeah, amazing. So it was about a year from when you came up with the idea to where you are now with your Quiet XPA out in the market doing amazing things, or it was a bit longer process than that?
Yeah, it was a bit longer than that. I probably sat on it as an idea for the best part of 12 to 18 months before reaching out to Andy. And then Andy, Benny, and Geordie and I kind of, figured out how to do that. We also, at the time, we all had, full-time jobs and full-time commitments to putting food on the table. So as inevitably with a side hustle project like this, it doesn't get the full time it deserves sometimes. So things inevitably take a little bit longer in the early days. So we were about 12 to 18 months afterwards of actually just in stealth mode, just bringing building out the brand, building out the product. And we actually launched on the 31st of July. So ironically, in 2020, when COVID kicked off, the initial rumblings of COVID kind of filtered onto us, and we meant to launch before Dry July, and have this amazing kind of product in market during the month of July. And as luck would have it, we only got onto shelf on the last day of the month, as the movement of not drinking in July came to an end. So we had a laugh about that. But we've been on shelf for just over a year now. So we're kind of, you and I chatting in kind of the second week of August. So yeah, just over a year.
Yeah, wow. And although you unfortunately missed Dry July, I guess it still seems like an incredible time to have a product like that out there. You must have noticed such a shift happening over the course of the pandemic or that time, where people are looking for a more mindful drinking experience or other alternatives to mark that end of the day moment, or to have at a barbecue where they might not feel like sticking on the beers every time we can get back together. Have you really noticed that? And I'm keen to hear how you see that change.
Yeah, for sure. I think like from on a personal level, like I was one of those people, like in my I'm 40 years old now, so I've got two beautiful children, happily married. So I feel like I'm at a different stage now than I was in my life, obviously in my 20s and early 30s. And but definitely, growing up in my 20s and 30s, I lived in London for just over 10 years as well, after from my early 20s onwards, before I moved to Sydney 10 years ago. And that time for me was like, I mean, drinking in the UK is like a national sport. You have beers for breakfast on a Monday, a Monday morning meeting. I'm over exaggerating for the sake of entertainment. But so I fair to say I got caught up in that kind of movement, if you want to call it, for a long time in London. At the time, never really thought it was an issue, but just growing a little bit older, you start realizing, like, hang on, like, I've missed a lot of opportunities. I've probably messed up a few situations with friends and family, and just by, not being in control of my alcohol consumption. So for me, it was always a thing where I think the older I got, I was kind of just conscious of, putting myself in a situation where potentially I could lose control, and I could make a fool of myself, and I could do something I'd regret and upset someone and feel like a bit of a dick the next day. So, and the older I got, the more prevalent that feeling became. So I got to a point where I was becoming, either pretty reclusive and didn't want to go out and socialize and miss out on potential opportunities, or just go out and, tread that fine line of, yep, I made it home in one piece, or, I crossed the line and just, behaved inappropriately, which is not a good thing to do. So, so for me, there was always that personal thing. I think the moment of realization, when it wasn't just me alone, a few years ago, I've got a few good friends who live in the States, so I go out there as much as I can, but we're staying with a friend of mine in Venice Beach in LA, and we went out and it was, no one was drinking. Like the youth over there at the moment, like they're all drinking kombucha or energy drinks, and yes, there might be kind of, marijuana is legalized, so they're kind of experimenting in those kind of spaces, but alcohol consumption just wasn't even a thing. And it was such an eye-opener for me to see that, where people go out, not be obliged to have a beer. In the UK and Australia, like drinking culture is huge. And it's all, I think it's all good and well if you don't have any issues with it, but a lot of issues do come from it. So it was really refreshing to notice that, particularly with the health and wellness movement kind of really kicking off, people being a lot more aware of what they put into their bodies and what they're consuming. So it's definitely been an interesting, I think our timing has been really well for Heaps Normal. There's obviously still a relative amount of pushback. I think the category, although it is really starting to pop and getting some traction, it's very much in the infancy stages still. So we get a lot of pushback from people that, particularly in the early days, like, the early days, but like very early on when we were, approaching potentially new customers, probably more the older age demographic of people going, oh, that's not a beer, that, publicans kind of scoffing at it. And then we would say to them, well, you do get people that come into your venue and don't drink, right? And they go like, yeah. And we go, so, well, what would they drink? And they say, oh, like a soda water. And we'd be like, what do they pay for that? It'd be like $3. I'd be like, okay, what if they bought a non-alcoholic beer for, a similar price of a normal beer? There'd be a lot more margin in it for you. And then the light bulb goes off and they order a few cases, and then they become a kind of an advocate of what we're doing, because they realize there is a growing trend of people, buying into the non-alc space. And it's been so overwhelmingly awesome for us to experience these different kind of situations of people from, all ages and demographics and walks of life who are really getting behind what we're doing.
Yeah, it's incredible. I know like friends of mine who were pregnant, say even a few years ago, the options are so limited. When you go out, you almost have to feel sorry for people who aren't drinking,
Yeah.
who've got like a glass of water or something in front of them. But it really does seem as though there's just so many more options out there, and having things that actually taste good as well, and have compelling marketing and packaging and all those kinds of things make it seem like a much more appealing option where you're not missing out as such.
Yeah, for sure. You know what's really weird? Did you say, as you said, a glass of water? I took a sip of a glass of water. Did you see that? Like
I
literally
did
as you
notice.
said that.
Water is good at times. It's got its place as well, like after exercise or, when you're on a video call. But when you're
Exactly.
out at a pub, it is nice to have, some other kinds of options. And I'm keen to hear as well, I guess, about your journey a bit more. Can you tell us, you mentioned that you stopped drinking because of your family relationship with your father, and can you tell us a bit about when you decided that you wanted to stop and how that journey went in the early days?
Yeah, for sure. I actually I abstained from alcohol a few years ago for about 2 years. When I just kind of met my now wife. This was 10 years ago. And it was a weird time. I was kind of, early 30s. And I felt super good about it, but it was pretty antisocial at the time. Like I would kind of avoid going out, because just having that question of, why are you not having a beer? And it's like a whole big thing where you're like, oh God, I really have to go into this conversation again and explain myself. But so kind of avoided it in that instance. And then after about 2 years of that, it became obvious that it was, we were avoiding situations. So I kind of slipped back into it, like had a glass of wine with dinner, and then I'm going to have a couple of beers with my mates. And I could just feel I was treading on that tightrope. And there were some occasions where I would, just cross the line, and then, either be inappropriate or, would black out occasionally. I could remember getting home and just had that fear the next day and just felt really kind of terrible about it. So, kind of beginning of this year, I kind of just got to a point where I was like, this is actually no good for me. I think, living in the shadow of what my dad kind of went through. So my dad was a very successful businessman. He kind of he used to import and export stainless steel out of the UK and did very well. And when he passed away, when he died, he was declared bankrupt. So he kind of had this vicious kind of relationship with alcohol, and I have kind of memories of that manifesting itself and him being abusive to my mom and my brother and I when we were kids. And it just started me thinking, like, my children are 6 and 3, and I don't want them to see me like that, and I don't want to be perceived in that way, like I kind of have those memories of my dad. So I think, yeah, becoming a father really, or a parent, really kind of changes your perspective of things. So and yeah, it was kind of the beginning of this year where I kind of felt like I was probably pushing the envelope a little bit more, like particularly in the creative industry. Like, it's like most industries anyway, going out and drinking and socializing is quite a big thing. So I was constantly feeling on the edge of, like, am I going to be in control of what happens this evening, or am I going to like lose control and then do something I might regret the next day? So I think a few too many of those moments and feelings, and crossing the line and then just becoming that person again that you kind of don't like, for me was the kind of catalyst to go, like, all right, let's call it a day. So yeah, I mean, we're in August now. I haven't had a drink since, I think it was like Feb. And to be honest, like the first few weeks again was pretty hard. And then you kind of get to a point where it's like, I'm actually kind of good with it now. Like, and touch wood that carries on. I can't really, like, I don't want to say I'll never have a drink again, but I can't really, I don't crave it. And I've got to a point where I'm comfortable going out now and not having a drink and not feeling peer pressure or alienated that I need to do that. It's weird. I think the more the time goes on around it, the more you kind of like, this is me now, and it's fine. And if people don't get that, that's cool. That's their deal, not mine. So
Totally. I
I'm
guess
kind of
once
cool
you're
with it.
comfortable with it yourself, that's already a huge hurdle, to
For
get through. And
sure.
so many people I talk to aren't even necessarily there. Like, it's probably why it takes some of us a few goes, because, you've got to almost push through this sort of barrier of where it goes from hard to just being part of your identity and just the way you show
For
up, and all
sure.
people know about it, and it's not a thing anymore, and you're not having
Yeah.
those cravings.
And I think everyone's different. And I think, like for me, like I'd consider myself an introvert in a way. Like, I'm pretty loud sometimes, but I do, if I had a choice not to go to a social occasion, I'd probably take the not going one, which drives my wife crazy sometimes, because she's like, we have to go to this dinner. I'm like, do we really have to go to this dinner? Yes, we do. So, but I think, that's certainly made it easy. But, I think part of the success of Heaps Normal, which is what, as founders, we're all being super aware of and vocal about from day one, is that everyone's different. And that's why we're called Heaps Normal. Like, your normal and my normal might be completely different to each other, and that's totally okay.
Mm,
If you go out and drink 3 glasses of wine 4 times a week, and that's you, that's cool. It doesn't mean I have to do that. And if I go out and don't drink alcohol, it doesn't mean you have to do that too. So I think just everyone having their own kind of version of normal is where we should be heading.
it's really nice. That's such a cool place you ended with your brand. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it was we thought about it long and hard, and I think it's like, if you tell a kid not to touch the hot plate, what's the first thing they're going to do is touch the hot plate, right? So I think from a brand, if we were to be preachy and say, don't drink and alcohol's bad for you and all that kind of stuff, people would just be like, people see through that stuff. It's just bullshit, and people kind of detect that stuff and just call bullshit on it. So I think, just being honest and I mean, like, the boys in particular, like Benny and Andy, like coming from the beer industry, like they're massive beer fans. Like Benny being a brewer, you give him a glass of beer, he can pull apart the ingredients in a mouthful. It's quite an impressive skill. So we've always said that we make non-alcoholic beer for people who really enjoy a beer, and I think that's where we've got that cut through, because we're not saying don't touch alcohol. We're saying, hey, instead of going out and having 8 beers and probably dropping your phone and breaking it and then missing work the next day, like, you could probably have like 3 normal beers and 3 Heaps Normal beers, and everything will be fine tomorrow, and that's kind of okay. And I think that's where people are kind of the pennies dropping, and people are kind of getting on board, which is awesome.
Yeah, I really love that. I've heard about friends of mine who are drinkers buying non-alc spirits to make cocktails that, just have one shot in them versus 2.5 shots on a
Huge.
school night, which is pretty cool. It
Love
makes a
that.
lot of room for growth in that
Mm.
category as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, like, Seedlip have massive respect for. Well, I have massive respect for kind of Ben Branson and the guys behind Seedlip that started it. Like, I mean, they were kind of first movers in a lot of ways. Like they kind of went into a category that didn't really exist, and they kind of commandeered it and really made their mark. And I think there's brands like that that have really just achieved massive proof of concept that there's a need for what we're all doing. And I think it's a really healthy kind of industry. It's we when some of the bigger brands start launching non-alc beers, and some of the bigger, like, kind of multinationals start doing it, it just proves there's a market out there for it, and people want this kind of stuff. And it's just educating the consumer a lot more as well. So when we see the bigger breweries doing kind of billboards and these massive national campaigns, it's really good, because it just creates awareness around what the rest of us are doing, which is great.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's exciting. And I'm keen to hear as well if there are any sort of new hobbies or things that you love doing now that you're sober, or where if you're getting joy and passion out of any different areas in your life.
Do you know what? It's really funny. Like, I'm one of those people who, like, I'm fascinated with productivity. Like, it absolutely fascinates me. Like, how someone like Elon Musk can achieve the greatness he has, and he has as much time as the rest of us. So I think, not having a hangover, or even, like, not even a bad hangover, like just being dusty the next day, like, not being like that has allowed me to really focus on, like, productivity hacks. And for me, there's things like, I wouldn't say so much hobbies. Like, I kind of grew up surfing, and that's been my thing as a kid. I don't surf enough because I run two businesses and have two children, and a family to kind of be there for and stuff. But yeah, I wish I was going to say I surf more, but I'm not. But yeah, just being more health conscious, being more aware of what goes into our body from food and drink, and sleep. I've invested in an aura ring recently. I don't know if you've seen these rings, these smart rings
Yeah,
that
tracking
track your
health.
sleep. Yeah, it's incredible. Like, so I wake up in the morning, and the app will tell me how much REM sleep I had, how much deep sleep, how much light sleep. They give you, like, kind of a readiness score for the day, and then you kind of know, all right, I probably worked a bit too late last night, or I didn't get enough sleep. So let's kind of fix that this evening. I go to bed a little bit earlier and make sure we're firing the next day.
So good. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be new hobbies. I guess it's about finding your own why, or, the things in your life that you want to focus in on without being dusty. That's really cool about
Oh,
it.
for
Yeah.
sure. Like getting up in the morning and reading a chapter of a book. Do you know how, like, enlightening it is to do something like that, as opposed to, like, forcing yourself out of bed, like making a coffee with one eye closed, like really trying to get into it. Like, waking up, and it sounds so wank because it's so, like, in vogue and all that kind of stuff. But, like, meditation and things like that, like just having that quiet time. Like, I genuinely wake up at 4:30 most days, and purely because it's just so nice and quiet, and it's the only time I can actually have some me time without kids and emails and phone calls going off. But yeah, just that alone, like waking up and having a bath at 4:30 in the morning, and just having some quiet time, or reading a chapter of a book,
Mhm.
when everyone else is asleep, or things like that have been an absolute game changer. And, like, being fully clothed and bathed and showered and ready to start work at, like, 6:15 when everyone's still asleep. You just feel like a superhero.
Yeah, what a way to start the day. You're already kind of ahead. You're
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, incredible. I feel like that is sobriety probably is the biggest productivity hack that no one talks about. Like, I
Oh
also noticed
man.
my capacity for work just gone through the roof in
Yeah.
comparison. Yeah.
How's your journey been? Let's switch the roles here.
Oh yeah, sure. So I quit drinking in on the 5th of January this year, and I
Oh
didn't
god.
necessarily know that I wanted to quit, but I kept sort of pushing out the date, which I thought I would start drinking again. Like, I'll just see if I can wait until the weekend. I've been drinking every day, so that would be nice. And then once a weekend came, I was like, all right, that was pretty hard, but we're here now, and let's see if I can go a bit longer. And yeah, so it just kind of continued. There were a few little things that I had to kind of confront or address in there. Like, my partner had bought me for my birthday in February whiskey tasting classes. And so that was sort of like, okay, I'll do 6 weeks, I'll go to my birthday. But then, like, in the back of my mind, I was sort of thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind actually going for longer. I wonder if I can get out of that, or I wonder if we can push that until later in the year, or whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't easy, but I needed to have a break for a whole bunch of health reasons. My skin, I had rosacea, and so I would have these massive flare-ups where my face would go red if I had a beer, and I'd be in the bathroom like running my face under a tap trying to like cool everything down, and sort of like menopausal hot flushes from alcohol. And I think that's also why I just started drinking whiskey only, because I sort of realized I'm not getting it from this whiskey. But then, like, just drinking whiskey every day, that's not great.
I mean, it's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. And also funny that I went to that first before I went to not drinking as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might have to start calling you Ron Burgundy from now on.
Yeah, totally.
If you're drinking that much whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. So it took a little while as well for me before it started to feel normal and natural. And actually, it's probably only, I guess, now or new that it's starting to move into that space where it feels really really relaxed and really joyful. But I've also been doing heaps of yoga and meditation, and it's almost like you need those things to come in and replace that relaxation that you're sort of getting artificially from the drink. It's like I needed to learn how to relax my own body and mind myself, and it's like a new superpower to be able to do that.
It is, right? Yeah, you feel so focused and healthy and fresh, and it's I really don't miss hangovers. And I feel like the older I was getting, the longer my hangovers would last as well, which was not an enjoyable experience at all.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. And I felt like the older I was getting, the more I could drink without getting any negative effects, which I think that's maybe bad in a way as well, because it's like just starts to become so habitualized, and the volumes don't seem weird.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So it's pretty great to be finding a new way and exploring all those things that in life that previously might have gone unnoticed. Like, I don't know, I feel as though when I stopped drinking, I realized that like any moment of the day can be really fun. It's not just after 5 p.m. It's like I can actually enjoy all day. Like, I can dance at any time if a good song comes on. I don't need to wait until I'm on the dance floor after a heap of drinks. I can make all this time really fun.
That's your normal. You see, that's your new normal, which is great.
I guess so. Yeah. People sort of talk about, I guess, that going in waves though as well. You hear I guess I've been following a whole bunch of people in the sober community, and you hear about this idea of pink clouds, or the fact that it's really feels really awesome for a while. But of course, you've got to process difficult emotions along the way, and hard things come up. Like, we're in lockdown, and there's definitely times when it feels more challenging than others to sit with your own feelings and to go through life, I guess. But it's really rewarding to find that new way of navigating
and
things.
I think like that, for me, like that kind of thing is like, it's down to a few things. Like, it's down to perspective, and just realizing, like, there's always somebody who's got it worse than I do. So realizing that, and then like, gratitude, just being grateful for what we have. And also just having, like you mentioned purpose and your why earlier, like really having that locked in, because that for me is everything, like we, like this lockdown thing, like I joke that I don't like to socialize and I'm okay with the lockdown, but it gets to a point where you're like, man, I need to go and see some people. Like, I feel like a hermit.
Yeah.
So it does, that does play on my mind a lot. But I think having that focus and that purpose and that why that you work towards and whatever it is you do, just makes it easier, and for me, like, that's the thing when, it's midnight and you should be going to bed, but you've got to work through this presentation because you've got to get it done. Having that purpose and that why is what kind of gets you through those things.
Yeah. Man, that must be so much easier. Do you have a heaps normal when you're doing those things?
Sometimes, yeah. It sometimes has a placebo effect as well. So you kind of like, even though it's non-alcoholic, you do feel like, oh, I'm drinking a beer, so now I'm not going to be productive, which I guess is not a bad thing on a Friday evening. But yeah, it's you don't want to be drinking them for breakfast on a Monday.
Yeah, yeah. That's hilarious. I have had before when I think it's also, I have that placebo effect when I'm around other people. I've been drinking a non alcoholic champagne. I had to actually go and double check. This is definitely non alcoholic, yeah, because I was having, feeling all that buzz, but I think it's from being around people. But I think maybe our brains are still attached to,
Yeah,
having
fully.
that beer to relax. So you still get
Oh man,
something from
yeah.
that for sure.
I mean, you have that non-alc champagne, and your feet just start dancing on their own, right? Because you're like getting in the vibe. Better for
Yeah.
non-alcoholic. It's great.
It's so good. And are there any sort of hacks or things that you would want to share with someone who was considering cutting back or being a bit more mindful about their drinking?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, it just goes back to purpose again. I keep talking about it, and I know it sounds like a pretty cliched thing to say, but um, you know, I kind of was on and off that bandwagon of not drinking, drinking, not drinking, drinking, on and off for a long time, and I didn't really have a reason to. I just knew in the back of my mind it wasn't very good for me to be drinking and as consistently as I was. And I knew it wasn't good for my health and my work and my relationships and all that kind of stuff. But I think having a real clear purpose is the kind of defining thing for me. So, for me, it's like, it's my wife and my kids, like, just knowing that what my brother's 2 years younger than me. He's literally my best friend in the whole world. He's been in the UK for a long time. He's recently moved to Portugal, so we don't get to see each other and not nearly enough. But knowing what him and I went through, with alcoholism in the family, I think having your own kids and realizing, like, hang on, like, I'm treading a pretty fine line here potentially if I let this thing slide, and knowing how it kind of, probably, if we're honest, like, really messed my brother and I up growing up, having to deal with that stuff. I don't want my kids to go through that. It doesn't have to happen. So I think having that reason and that why is a real big hack, like, number one. And then just kind of finding, for me, it was just kind of finding some other forms of interest. So, like, I was diagnosed with ADHD the last few months. So for me, that was a huge realization of, like, why I have a library of books behind me that I've never read any of them, things like that. So, like, now actually going, hang on, like, I don't have to go out and have beers tonight. I can literally get into bed and read 4 chapters of that book that's been on my bookshelf for 9 years that I've been dying to read. So having
Mm.
that kind of a perspective, and then mixing that in with, just trialing things out, like cold showers and ice baths and things like that. And, like, different types of health related things. Like, I've been on the mushroom journey and the hemp oil journey, and just trying to, like, body hack all these things and just see what works for you and what doesn't. And I think when you have a clear mind and a clear body that's not, blurred by alcohol, it gives you a really interesting perspective on whether these things are right for you or not. So I think,
Mm.
yeah, if there's any hacks, it's just give things a go.
Wow, I love that. It's so, yeah, that's definitely what I've been doing as well. I've definitely gotten onto the cold showers, but I feel as though, like, I might not have noticed what was working for me before because you're always feeling a
That's
bit
exactly it,
lousy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That's it.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, you can feel the effects of things quickly.
Totally. Yeah, you just have a clear head. You're not blurred by that foggy kind of, like, ugh. I was drunk 2 days ago and I'm still not feeling 100%, because you kind of feel 100% all the time. Like, like, the power of waking up before the sun as well is such a huge thing. Like, like, we as a family, sometimes we drive down to the beach, in early morning, and just kind of, the kids just ride up and down. I live in Manly, so the kids ride up and down their scooters, and, if every now and again jump in for a surf, or just, have a coffee with my wife and watch the sun come up. It's like, you don't get to do that when you're lying in bed with a steaming hangover, so it's super
No.
refreshing.
Yeah. What an incredible way to start the day.
It's
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah. I love the sound of your morning routines. Well, thank you so much, Pete. It was so good to have a chat to you about all things.
Pleasure.